Hi, everybody. Come on in. Please come in and sit down. We have a very exciting end of our afternoon. Before we start, I just want to ask you to join me in thanking our co-host, my dear friend Susan Brown. Can we give her a big round of applause? Susan, thank you so very much. So this is the beginning of an exciting adventure over the course of the next couple of days. Tomorrow, AdTech proper, the big AdTech starts, and we're very pleased. So let me tell you a couple of highlights that we have for tomorrow. We'll open with David Fisher from Facebook, who will be doing the opening keynote. At lunch, we're very pleased in his first big public appearance. We have Walter Isaacson, the CEO of the Aspen Institute and the author of the very brilliant book, Steve Jobs, which I just finished 2 nights ago, to talk about Steve Jobs, the recently deceased CEO of Apple, and the subject of his book. And we also will close with Christian Oletzen, whose last name I have trouble pronouncing, from Google+. We have an arc for social media tomorrow on the main stage. We also have, we have breakouts on mobile and just an extraordinary array of content in the conference. And we have the biggest expo hall in the world. This is our biggest show. It's the biggest digital marketing show on the planet, and we are excited to have you all come back. For those of you who are watching this at home, streaming from outside of New York, make your plane reservations for next year, because that's going to be even bigger. So the closing of AdTech Inspire this year, we're very, very lucky to have Jon Leibowitz, who's the chair of the Federal Trade Commission. He joined the commission in 2004. He was made chair in 2009. He is a tireless advocate for the rights of consumers, whether it be protecting their rights during a very down economy or protecting their rights to privacy, which, of course, is one of the things that we're quite concerned about here at AdTech. While being a champion of the consumer, he is also pro-industry self-regulation, and he is here to help us see the way forward so that we can have the best possible environment for advertisers and consumers alike. As I said, we're very lucky to have him here. I'm deeply grateful that he's come to share his views with us. Please let's give a big AdTech welcome to Jon Leibowitz. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Brad, for that kind and entirely undeserved introduction. And let me also thank Warren Pickett and the rest of the staff here for really doing a fabulous job of putting this event together. And a series of speakers this afternoon, at least the ones I've seen, were terrific. So who's sticking around tonight for the reception? Can I see a show of hands? A lot of you. That's good. And, it's going to be held right in this room. I'm sure it's going to have plenty of infinity pizza and digital eggs, and it should be a pretty good party. And then again, why wouldn't it be? After all, we're in New York City, where Truman Capote held the black and white ball, dubbed the Party of the Century 45 years ago, almost to this day, just a few blocks uptown from here. Where in the 1970s, my old neighbor, John Travolta, he really was my neighbor, actually, although he was considerably older than me. And he danced considerably better. And his friends danced the night away at Studio 54, where today you really can't walk a block without running into a celebrity headed for a Chelsea night spot, or a crowd converging on an open-air revel for Halloween or Fashion Week or New Year's Eve in Times Square. But none of this compares to the shindig the high-tech advertising industry, with help from publishers and marketers, is throwing. Thank you all for hosting a fabulous party in cyberspace. Your guests, consumers, are having the time of their lives, checking in online to do everything from diagnose their cat's skin condition to find their future, that was serious, to find their future spouse. And the economy, which frankly deserves a little fun after the last few years, is the belle of your ball. From 1999 to 2008, internet advertising grew from $4 billion to $23 billion annually. I think that's a compound growth rate of almost 40%. You know, I think I just heard Ben Bernanke pop a bottle of champagne in the VIP room. That was a Washington joke. I know it doesn't work that well here. That was to your credit that I only got modest laughter. What a cyber celebration. Everyone's invited, the bar never closes, and the drinks are free. Or are they? As you well know, the advertising you create, to a great extent, is picking up the tab for all of this free content online. It's content we've come to expect and enjoy. And it's not just any sort of advertising, but high-tech targeted marketing that relies on the collection, analysis, and storage of information about who consumers are, what they do, and where they go on the internet. It's at this intersection of advertising online and privacy rights that the FTC jumps in. By the way, not to erect a stoplight, but really more to take a look at the traffic patterns. Our mission, one of our missions, is to safeguard consumer privacy, developing national policy, enforcing consumer protection laws and regulations, and educating businesses and individuals. That's, of course, not all we do. We fight financial fraud, false advertising, and identity theft. On the antitrust side, which is the other part of what we do at the FTC, we free the marketplace of anti-competitive conduct so that honest business people, like those of you in the room, can continue to serve your customers and make a profit and not be at a competitive disadvantage by those who don't, against those who don't play by the rules. As I told the Chamber of Commerce early this year, we're an enforcement agency, we're not a regulator, and we really strive to keep the burdens on businesses to a minimum. Advertising has been an issue in the FTC's portfolio for more than half a century, and privacy for almost that long. More recently, as many of you know, we've taken a look at online behavioral advertising, data collection, and consumer tracking, which represents a kind of a market transaction of exactly the type that needs to be fair to all parties. Consumers online agree to give up some of what the father of the Federal Trade Commission, Louis Brandeis, called the right to be let alone, and in return, they get personalized advertising and an open invitation, of course, to the cyber party of the 21st century. Of course, we know that Americans expect a healthy dose of marketing with their entertainment. This is a nation that cheers the Allstate Sugar Bowl, played at the Mercedes-Benz Superdome, buys car oil based on the patches of their favorite NASCAR driver's jumpsuit, munches Reese's Pieces while watching E.T. Phone Home. Far more importantly, most consumers, including myself, appreciate viewing ads online that are customized to our interests. I mean, who wants to stroll through a leggings montage from Forever 21 when instead you can open your computer right to the announcement of LL Bean's annual Chino sale? When consumers trade some of their privacy online for all the riches of cyberspace, we at the FTC are not interested in debating whether that's a good deal. We know the economy benefits, and no one has complained to us that there's just too much great free content online. What we're more concerned about is that some consumers don't even know they've made a deal at all, or if they do, they don't quite understand the price that they're paying. Last month, we coined the term cyberazzi to explain how online tracking works. Like the paparazzi who follow celebrities, online cookies and other data catchers follow consumers as they browse, reporting their every stop and action to many of you in the room who, in turn, collect an astonishingly complete profile of consumer behavior online. Now, of course, every click on the internet isn't the sound of a cyberazzi shutter, but that still leaves too many consumers who don't understand that they're trading their privacy for free online content, or who haven't made an informed choice to do so. And even if they have, they may not know or accept that they often lose control over their personal data once it's captured. A consumer who has no problem revealing her browsing history to advertising companies targeting their pitches to her interests may nevertheless feel very differently about that information if it's going to a financial company deciding whether to give her a mortgage, or a health insurer setting her rates, or a prospective employer determining her career path. And I'm sure most of you in the audience would agree that everyone, really everyone, ought to have control over how data about our browsing habits is used. And to its credit, my understanding is that the Digital Advertising Alliance announcement of yesterday addresses much of these concerns, and I'll talk more about the DAA shortly. Now, as you well know, many of you in the audience know, we proposed a do not track option that would allow consumers to choose whether companies can collect data about their searching online and their browsing activities. To be effective, such an opt-out system, and it's an opt-out, not an opt-in system, would contain several elements. It should be universal, honored not just by the advertising industry, but also by other companies that track consumers online. Consumers would have to be able to find and use the system easily, and the tracking preference should be persistent. That is, it shouldn't disappear if a consumer clears her cookies or updates his or her browser. And most important, do not track should allow consumers to do more than just turn off targeted advertising. Consumers should be able to opt out of the collection of behavioral data for all purposes, except for a few specific categories, like preventing click fraud or facilitating billing. Our vision of Do Not Track bears some similarities to the successful Do Not Call program. Are most of you on Do Not Call, on the Do Not Call registry? Could you raise your hands? That's pretty healthy, far more than half. There are more than 200 million registered phone numbers. Do Not Call has brought peace and quiet to Americans' dinner hour. In fact, Dave Barry called it the most successful government program since the Elvis stamp, which makes us very proud. But unlike Do Not Call, we do not think Do Not Track should be administered by the government. We hope instead that you in industry will work collaboratively to give consumers choices about how and when they are tracked online. As many of you are aware, the Digital Advertising Alliance, which is composed of advertising trade associations, is making considerable progress on its Ad Choices program, which allows consumers to opt out of targeted advertising. While the DAA's system is not yet universal, it's doing a nice job expanding within the galaxy. Many in this room, advertisers, advertising networks, and brands have joined this significant effort, and those of you who haven't might want to actually think about doing so, because unless other companies in the internet advertising ecosystem also participate in offering meaningful choices about online tracking, the few party poopers who don't are going to make the system that much less effective. The DAA's ad icon is popping up more and more in different places, though I still think some work needs to be done to make sure the choices it offers are easier to understand and exercise. We don't want DAA's ad choices to follow the model of mortgage disclosures, which confuses a lot of information with useful information. I'm confident this won't happen in the DAA, to the DAA and its system. We're also encouraging the industry to ensure that consumers get to choose not just the advertising they see, but also the information about them that the advertisers and others collect. In other words, consumers should decide not just what they watch, but whether and how much they are watched. And finally, we are heartened to see DAA working with the Better Business Bureau to establish an enforcement program. Not every self-regulatory program, and I used to work for the Motion Picture Association, which has actually one of the very good self-regulatory programs, the motion picture rating system. Not every self-regulatory program includes real accountability, but the ones that do generally work better and avoid a more regulatory heavy hand from Congress. And just this morning, the BBB announced its first 6 enforcement actions against companies not offering adequate opt-outs. That seems to me to be a promising start. We encourage the DAA to join with the browser companies to make the ad choices opt-out permanent and move us closer to a do-not-track architecture that's persistent. Microsoft, Mozilla, and Apple have implemented their own do-not-track features, and a half dozen advertising networks have pledged to honor the Mozilla Do Not Track header. We hope and we expect that this is just the beginning of a groundswell. The FTC staff, including our chief technologist, the wonderful Ed Felton, some of you may know him, he's a Princeton engineering professor on leave, are involved in the W3C, which is a very critically important internet standard-setting body working on defining technical standards for do not track. W3C has the participation of all the interested stakeholders, advertising and technology companies, including the DAA, publishers, browser companies, companies of many of you in this room, public interest groups as well. We think the organization, after a period of time, because these are complicated decisions, will strike a balance that provides effective choices but doesn't interfere with the normal data flows necessary for a thriving internet. And what's most important here, seems to me, is whether or not you like the DAA approach or the FTC's do not track option better. We are clearly talking about the same thing. It's a self-regulatory way to ensure consumers can control their information. Now, we know you want to throw the sort of party that consumers clamor to attend. And as you develop increasingly refined browser controls and more granular ad industry programs like the DAA system, implemented by companies like Evidon, consumers will choose to receive your targeted ads and agree to the tracking that backs them, because they'll feel certain that the information they reveal will enhance their internet experience, not harm or embarrass them. And looking at the schedule for tomorrow, it's clear that most of the ad tech folks, most of you in this room, recognize this, at least if the 2:45 presentation, which is entitled User Experience Matters, Making Sure Digital Experiences Don't Suck, is any indication. Online industry will flourish even more. In fact, statistics demonstrate that only a handful of consumers opt out when using the DAA mechanism. I think that will be true whatever mechanism ultimately ends up securing the majority of marketplace support. Primarily because it makes good business sense, most companies, especially the ones in this room, will want a balanced self-regulatory approach to do not track. But some small faction will not, continuing to rely on cyberazzi to collect consumer data surreptitiously. Again, these are the players that will keep this issue open in Congress and allow privacy advocates on both sides of the aisle to use the online advertising industry as a periodic piñata rather than consistently commending you for the benefits, and they are very real benefits, that you bring to all Americans. Of course, digital advertisers are not the only businesses that thrive on the web or the only hosts of the cyber party of the century. As with any really hot party, the room is full of models. That is, business models, like behavioral advertising, but also ones like social networking, cloud computing, and mobile services and sales. And we at the FTC strive to keep up with the challenges of ever-expanding e-commerce and e-advertising. For example, next month we're going to host a workshop to explore facial recognition technology and what it implies for privacy, for security, and for internet innovation. We hope to see at least some of you there as this new technology is creeping into, that's a bad word, this new technology is developing everywhere from online social networks to digital signs to mobile apps. Our most ambitious effort along these lines was a December 2010 preliminary staff report on privacy, which drew on roundtable discussions with a wide range of stakeholders. In it, we proposed a new framework for safeguarding consumers' personal data, one flexible enough to allow both businesses and consumers to continue to profit from an innovating, growing, and rich information marketplace. We expect to issue our final report in the coming months, and we expect it to be very complementary with another report and work that the Department of Commerce is doing on privacy. Our preliminary report puts forth 3 principles to guide policymakers and industry as you, we hope, or they, work together to protect privacy online. First thing we want to see is privacy by design, Companies in the business of collecting and storing consumer data need to build privacy protections into their everyday business practices. I'll give you an example of where privacy by design wasn't used. That was in early peer-to-peer technology, really cool technology that allowed for the sharing of information and certain types of content, but really lagging security features, and that's why so many people had confidential personal information extracted from their computers through peer-to-peer. The second principle is transparency. Companies that collect and maintain consumer data online, especially data brokers, need to tell consumers what's going on. By the way, our staff has been looking at data disclosures in mobile devices. We found one form that took 109 clicks to get through. 109 clicks. Please don't try to read this policy while driving. Okay, that was a joke. If you're not going to laugh at my jokes, done. By the way, how many of you actually read privacy policies, by the way? Could you raise your hands? Okay, I would say that's about 15% in this most sophisticated of audiences. And we think transparency is not an unreasonable request. My daughters can go to any of a number of retail clothing websites and with one click see a clear description of a pair of pants, color, sizes, fit, customer reviews, shipping options. One more click, and that's a total of 2, not a total of 109, and they can choose exactly the pants they want in the sizes they want, in their favorite colors, shipped to where they'd like it to be shipped. So if you put the guy who designed that page on the job of presenting meaningful disclosures and consent forms, I think you would have much more transparency and much clearer privacy policies. The third component of our privacy report is choice. Consumers should have choices about the collection and use of their data. Businesses shouldn't have to offer any choice when consumers expect that data to be shared, for example, when you're fulfilling a customer's order. Now, while we at the FTC are very proud of our work on privacy policy, and you in the audience will let us know if you disagree with it, I think most of you probably agree with where we're heading, we do more than talk a good privacy game. We are primarily an enforcement agency, and over the last 10 years, we brought more than 100 spam and spyware cases, almost 80 do not call cases, and 34 cases involving inadequate data security. And we've also brought cases against powerful online companies. Google, for using Gmail contact information to start up its Buzz social network without consumer consent. And Twitter, for data security lapses that allowed hackers to gain control of a variety of accounts, Britney Spears account, a Fox News account, one sending tweets from then President-elect Obama offering the chance to win $500 in free gas. You'd think if you take over his account, you could be funnier than that, but I'm just giving you the facts. And while Google and Twitter are household names, the online advertising industry may be a bit of a mystery to the average consumer, not to enforcement folks at the FTC. When we see a violation, we take action. Last spring, we wrapped up a major enforcement effort aimed at the online advertising network Chitika, which we alleged violated the FTC Act by offering consumers the ability to opt out of targeted advertising, but without telling the consumers that the opt-outs were effective only for 10 days. 10 days. You heard that right. And of course, that's not only wrong, that's unacceptable. Consumers deserve meaningful, not illusory control over what companies do with their personal information. Chitika agreed to a 20-year order that prohibits future misrepresentations. And just today, we announced another behavioral advertising case against ScanScout, which involves flash cookies. ScanScout, now owned, I think, by Tremor Video, is the web's largest video in-stream ad network. The company's privacy policy stated that consumers could stop ScanScout from tracking by deleting cookies through their browser. But ScanScout, is there some water in here? Yes. But ScanScout uses flash cookies, which, as many of you know, are not affected when consumers try to delete them. The final order requires ScanScout to place a tracking opt-out on its homepage and in advertisements, one that's easy for consumers to find, to understand, and to use. That's also a 20-year order. These cases, the first of many more privacy matters you'll see from us, I think send a signal that the FTC isn't going to tolerate attempts to undermine consumer choice. So, you know, last week I got an email from the conference organizers giving me the, quote, 411 on all the ad tech parties tonight. It said, and I quote, "One thing is for certain, the digital marketing industry definitely loves to party." But we already knew that, didn't we? Because you are throwing, and I've said this before, but let me just conclude with it, the cyber party of the century. And we at the FTC have no interest in shutting it down. On the contrary, don't laugh at that, that's serious. On the contrary, we are all enthusiastic guests playing Angry Birds and following Lady Gaga's tweets along with everybody else. And more important, you're helping us do our job. You're opening new markets and opportunities for consumers. You're keeping the economy growing and innovating in what we all know are difficult times. Our only concern is making sure that all your guests understand that there could be a cover charge. When there is, they should get to make meaningful choices about how much they are willing to pay to get in. But beyond that, in the immortal words of the B-52s, and I'm looking around the audience and I think most of you are old enough to remember the B-52s, let's keep this party going. Thank you. I'm happy to answer questions and to sit on the panel. Thank you, Brad.
Come join me, please, here. We're going to invite a panel up now. Why don't you sit here? And let me talk to you about the panel that they're racing to the stage right now. We have Dave Morgan, who is the CEO of Simul Media. He was formerly the CEO of Dakota. Simul Media does addressable advertising for television. Dakota was online behavioral targeting. He is also the chair of the IAB's, come on in, this is Dave, let's give him a round of applause, the chair of the IAB's Public Policy Council. Next we have Grace Liao. She's the SVP of Ad Operations for Viviki's Nerve Center. So she's one of the people who has to act on all of this information we're talking. Grace, welcome. And we have Scott Meyer, who is the CEO of Evidon, which the chairman mentioned just a few minutes ago as being one of the technology companies that's powering compliance with these new rules. Let's welcome Scott. All right. So I'm going to ask the first question, and I'm going to ask it first of Grace, which is, I think, implicitly in the conversation, not just today, but sort of our general conversation about privacy versus ad efficacy and online tracking. We have this idea that somehow tracking the heck out of people and knowing as much as possible inherently means for more effective advertising. So that the more we track, the more we stalk, the more information we have, the better the ads work. And so, is that true? Grace, do you think that we necessarily have the business interest of your clients and the privacy interest of citizens and consumers are at odds?
I think for a lot of our clients, they do want to track, but they do it solely for anonymous purposes. They aggregate a lot of data, and they want to know how the campaigns are performing. It's not necessarily just to retarget these people, although we know that retargeting works really well. And when we scale retargeting, media becomes very efficient. So those are sort of the two pillars, I like to say, that we kind of operate on. But we don't track just to track, because as everyone knows, for the digital space, we collect a ton of data. We're deluged by data. And cookies and all that kind of stuff, what do they do for us, right? Beyond the tracking, there isn't much that we do with it. We don't combine it with PII data or anything like that. So it's really more for just results, optimization, and then minimally the retargeting.
So Scott, what are you finding at Evidon? Are you finding in terms of efficacy, are trackable ads more effective? Or what's the impact on Grace and her clients?
So what we're seeing is, so we don't provide the targeting data. We make it compliant with the principles that were advanced by the FTC and incorporated by the DAA. What we're seeing is unbelievable growth, because if you look around this room and you look at your full exhibit hall, everybody is taking advantage of this open ecosystem to try to come up with a different way to use anonymous data to provide better results for Grace's clients. And so our role is to be in the middle and ensure that that data is collected in a safe way and that it's transparent to consumers and they have control over it. But based on what we're seeing in terms of both the growth of the self-regulatory program and the overall volume, especially this time of year, it's a very vibrant ecosystem. And what we're starting to see is, I think the chairman alluded earlier to, a few bad apples can spoil the whole party. And I think the enforcement actions from the DAA and the FTC, we're seeing that the last few holdouts who said, this program's sort of not that big a deal, they're seeing that they're not going to get a lot of money from Grace and her clients unless they get with the program.
So, Dave, actually explicit in what the chairman was talking about is the notion that consumers care, right? That they really care about this. In your experience, you've been doing this for a while. How, and Mr. Chairman, I'd love to have you follow up on this.
Sure.
Do people care? I mean, do people care if they're being tracked, or is it just, privacy nuts and, fringy people? Well, how real an issue is this?
I think they care. I think certainly they care at the first level to be informed and asked. And I think one of the things that we found, over the years is that the more that you push the notices out front, the more proactive they are, the more robust they are, and the clearer it is actually to understand when you get to the page. In most cases, the opt-outs go down because you're much more likely to opt out of a 109-click privacy policy than you are some very simple figures, something we were involved with at AOL at one point, that actually explains exactly what happens and shows you the life of the cookie. And so, I like to... some of my viewpoints changed on this the better part of 10 years ago when I was at a conference and Walt Mossberg from the Wall Street Journal was there, and he called me out and he said, how come you have all of this data? We are your consumers who are out there, you're trying to make money on, and your ads still suck. You're not being straight with us and your ads suck, so give us one or the other. And if so improve the ads with better data, but tell us what you're doing.
So I would say, I think consumers generally I don't know that it's a passion of consumers, but I think they generally like targeted ads. They like things that relate to them rather than things that don't. I think they care about privacy at a certain level. They want to make sure that their data is protected. They want to make sure that, and I think they also want or deserve to have choices. So I used to serve with, when I first came to the commission, I was a non-chair commissioner. And the Republican chairman, wonderful woman named Debbie Majaris, now the chief legal officer of Procter & Gamble, used to say, and we were fighting a scourge of spyware and nuisance adware at the time, your computer is your property. And if people want to put things in it, you ought to have a choice. And I think that's exactly right. That's a point that Walt Mossberg also made, I believe, at that very same conference, or maybe he was just making it at every conference he went to. So anyway.
So for those of you in the audience who might have a question, we have microphones there and there. So stand up and we'll get to you in a couple of minutes. This is an open question for anybody. Why, they're called EULAs, or end user licensing agreements, or privacy policies. Why do they all start with "Call me Ishmael" like they're Moby Dick? What is happening that they're...
I'd like to jump in on this one, just because in a previous life, having been a privacy lawyer 20 years ago in the newspaper industry before I got into being an entrepreneur, one, I don't think there's enough leadership on the part of the companies to really engage the lawyers and others to understand what we're trying to do here, what we're trying to communicate, and why we're doing it. And a lot of people will just defer to say, well, yeah, my lawyers gave me this 14-page one, and this is what I'm going to use. And that's, you're not doing your part. In other words, this is part of communication. If you don't mind, I love the example I'm going to reuse about the commerce thing, because I hadn't thought about that. But we have amazing people at doing interfaces and lots of other things, and without question, our privacy policies are absolutely our worst. It's the worst interface that we have on probably any site.
And what we're seeing in working with our clients is that the privacy policy is a legal document. And so since I'm not a lawyer, but I sometimes will play one on TV, I'll sometimes get into these conversations, and then very quickly I'll hear, essentially, listen, this is for the lawyers. And so what we're seeing is that just because it's in the privacy policy doesn't mean you have to force someone into the privacy policy to figure out what's going on. Almost think of it that as advanced as the advanced course if you are an attorney, because you have to be careful with what's in there, because if you don't put something in there that's accurate, that, as the chairman said, that's a deceptive trade practice. What we're seeing is pulling the information out of it and translating it to English. And this is, I think, a helpful tip for everyone in the audience. The lawyers will do their thing, and absolutely, I couldn't underscore Dave's point enough. Bringing the lawyers together with the product people and the agency to have the discussion as soon as possible is vital. But the marketing people can take the privacy policy and write it down in English and get that as close to the consumer. As long as there's a link to the privacy policy for the people who want to get their lawyer on, you're going to be okay. Don't worry about having to reform an entire privacy policy. Think about how do I take the salient points for the consumer and get them as close to them as possible.
Think about things like video. Just like we're great at using video and YouTube and things to communicate, like in 30 seconds, like how great something is, but we don't have anyone just saying, "Here's what I do."
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, would that satisfy the FTC?
Well, I would say two things. I think clearer, more understandable privacy policies are a very good thing, and. We sort of look at privacy issues on two different tracks. One track is sort of the policy work that we try to do, where we work with companies, and I think things like privacy by design and transparency and choice are things that have generally been embraced, at least at a certain level, by industry. The other part of our efforts is enforcement. So if you have like privacy policies that aren't accurate, you might be in violation of the FTC Act for an unfair deceptive act of practice. So since I'm mostly a law enforcement agent, although I don't carry a badge, I don't think I can say that that's precisely what we want. You have to look at it case by case, but it certainly seems to be the direction that businesses and enlightened businesses like folks in this audience ought to be heading in.
I would also add that most of the advertisers play a very defensive move when it comes to privacy policy.
Yeah.
They look at it from the standpoint of, okay, are they going to get me on this one because I didn't fully disclose? And because I disclosed one other thing, what if I didn't disclose the next thing? What happens then? And there's no sort of true governance on their end. It starts at the legal level, and by the time it gets down to the marketing people, it's too late.
So, yeah, but I also say this. When you look at enforcement agencies like ours, I mean, we make common sense judgments, right? And so if you have a shorter but more understandable privacy policy, we're going to get that, right? You're allowed to have, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I think it's just better to have, obviously 2 or 3 clicks of a privacy policy that doesn't articulate everything than 109, click privacy policy that nobody possibly reads, right? Except for my staffer, who I asked to look at the most nauseating privacy policies. So anyway.
So one thing we've seen in the industry over the past several years is, it used to be about websites, and now websites are getting pushed out into widgets and pushed to Facebook pages. That, it used to be that a brand controlled its brand, and now in the age of social media, the brand is a conversation. And so the reason it's a kind of long-winded statement, but Grace, for your clients, are they aware of, or am I wrong in believing that a privacy policy and an attitude towards your customers and their personal information is a part of their brand?
Is a part of their, sorry?
Part of their brand. Part of their brand identity is what their agencies, what they do in the marketing department, that this is constitutive of their identity. It's an extreme statement, but is that one that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely look at it as an extension of their brand, and it's what their brand encompasses. And we always advise our clients that, hey, if what you're going to do with your client's data or the consumer's data appears in tomorrow's New York Times, Washington Post, what have you, your major newspaper, how would you feel about it? If you gasp and like, oh my God, then don't do it, right? So that's our this is your litmus test. But when you've now extended to Twitter, Facebook, and whatever else, you now have to also abide by the terms of service of Twitter and of Facebook. And there's only so much the marketers can own in that space. So as much as they want it to be an extension, they can't control it because it's now outside of their domain. Facebook controls it, Twitter controls it, no longer our clients.
So we have, looks like we have 2 questions. So house rules, you got to tell us who you are, and remember these are questions, not essays. So tell us who you are. Okay.
Well, I come from a long... No, I'm kidding. My name is Mike Albanese. I'm actually a content and copy director for an internet marketing company. And my question was on the do not, specifically on the do not click, or I'm sorry...
Do not track?
Yeah, do not track. And I haven't read any of the policy on it, but and you have to pardon me because I'm nervous in front of a bunch of people. What is an example of specifically of what it is that you're trying to stop? Because I think as advertisers, none of us want to start a relationship with our customers that is dishonest. You know, we don't want to have bad privacy policies, but at the same time, we're marketing to them. We're trying to get them excited to take an action. And where's the line as far as what the FTC is wanting to, where the FTC is moving from educating the public as opposed to protecting the public from their own ignorance? Where's that burden of responsibility come in?
Well, I would say this. The approach that we've taken for Do Not Track is self-regulatory. We don't want to impose it. We want responsible companies to offer it. And the notion is this. We all understand that the free content that we've all come to expect and enjoy is driven by advertising. So, you know, we recognize that this is a sort of a beneficial trade-off for consumers and for industry. But on the other hand, people have a right, this is my view, it's the view of the majority of the commission, people have a right not to be tracked in cyberspace if they don't want to. Doesn't mean you can't serve them ads, but it means if they don't want their information collected, they should have a right to sort of opt out. In Europe, by the way, the debate is just the opposite. It's about, you know, whether these ads can be served, and if so, whether it should be opt-in, which is, I think, the direction they're heading in. And then let's also take sort of certain types of populations or certain types of information. Let's say, I mean, we all know, and Dave knows this because he used to, he had a relationship with AOL. 4 or 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, AOL put out a bunch of sort of collected internet information on consumers. It was all non-PII and for research purposes. And the New York Times deconstructed that and found out who those people were. So let's say, and that was, you know, and the information is far more granular, as you know, now. So let's say we're talking, so there's particular types of information, insurance, healthcare, financial. It seems to me, particularly if someone wants to opt out of, someone wants to opt out of collection of information, they should have the right to do that. And I think most businesses want to let them do it. And I also think, going back to what Grace said, going back to what Scott said, I think that, you know, if you have a clear, if you say you can opt out of this, of some of your information being collected or your information being collected, most people really wouldn't do it, particularly if you make that offer up front. So that's sort of what we're thinking about. And again, we don't want to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. We don't think that this does this. I would say that, and we're not doing any regulations in this area, but I would say you always have to, you know, think about what Congress might do, because although I think this is going to be a Congress where they don't enact a lot of legislation, privacy has always been a fairly bipartisan issue, one of the few in Congress, in a very vitriolic Congress these days. So I hope that sort of answers your question.
Mostly. I'll let you have
Okay, thank you.
All right. All right, please tell us who you are.
Mike Evans with Website Magazine. Could you talk a little bit about some of the phone rooms that you shut down, or you guys shut down a few years ago, or last year or so, the internet marketing phone rooms, and what you're seeing in that space and what you expect to be happening in the future?
When you say phone rooms, you mean?
I guess Ivy Capital was one of the big ones. They were, like, people would get internet leads, and they would some of these phone rooms, and they would call people all day and try to sell them stuff.
Well, there's sort of two approaches we've kind of taken to this, right? One is violations of do not call. If you're on the do not call list and they're calling you, they're not allowed to do that. So we have brought some...
Yeah, not that one. They were high-pressure sales is what the complaints were.
Right. Well, you know, there's a lot of deception involved. We have we essentially prosecute a lot of fraud cases. Often, it involves the generating of leads. It also involves, basically fraudulent transactions where in these boiler rooms, malefactors are calling up consumers and they're offering all sorts of deals, that turn out not to be true. Particularly and I don't know if you're talking about this, but particularly we've seen a huge growth area because, bad guys go where the money is, involving foreclosure rescue scams, debt consolidation. We have probably brought about 90 cases in that space, and with state attorneys general, probably about 400 in the last 2.5 years. So it's something we're staying on top of, and it's a shame that we don't have fining authority. In most instances, we do for do not call violations, which are sometimes coupled with these core frauds, because we would love to have even greater sanctions against these bad guys.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have one more question.
Malefactors.
Please tell us who you are over there.
Tagman.
Oh, hold on. Say that again, please.
Chris Brinkworth from Tagman. Who's ultimately responsible for the data collection and usage? Would it be the consumer? Would it be the website? Would it be the advertiser? Who, in your view, would actually be ultimately responsible for that?
In terms of how we're advising our clients, the answer is you actually can't. You can't answer the question that way. You need to turn it around, which is look at everybody in this chain. The consumer has a responsibility to. The responsibility is to be able to get transparency about what's happening with their data. Everybody else in that chain has a responsibility to ensure that any consumer in a logical fashion can find out what their practices are, and if they don't like it, to have the ability to opt out. So what does that mean? For sure, it means on your own website, you've got to make it really easy. Second, it means getting with industry self-regulatory programs like the DAA so that your access to that information can be in a central place. And then the final thing is understand how data is being used on your own website and where it's being used in ads. And I think especially on brands' own websites is the next area for this. I think content publishers who are ad-supported, they have a much better handle on what's happening on their own website because they see all this third-party code there and they see the data leaking off. There are thousands more brand websites than there are that sell ads, and the amount of code that's there and that's leaking off and that is not made transparent to the consumer, that's where I think brands really need to get a good handle on what's happening on their own websites. And in Europe, it's not a best practice. That's becoming the law.
I think anybody who is collecting data has responsibility. Yeah. I think that's the bottom line. They have responsibility around security of the data that's collected, whether you need to encrypt it or not, whether you choose to collect PII or not. You have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to give the consumers choice. You have the responsibility to give them access. Because like it or not, data is a currency for the publishers, for the data providers. That's how they keep in business, and that's why this is so sensitive. Because as our industry evolves, do we then also evolve that if you're a consumer and you're giving more data, do you get compensated? I mean, that's a question. And then notice. I think if you're collecting data and you're providing that transparency, then you should notify the consumers that, hey, your data is being collected, this is how it's being collected, and what's being used of it.
I think this is, one of the issues behind the chairman's point about universal and the need to making these kinds of policies universal, because the issue we have is, and this is one of the things that was one of the hardest things, I think, to bring the Digital Advertising Alliance together and get it driving forward, was a recognition that we have very big chains and an awful lot of leakage going on, and you might have what are the good actors at the publisher side, the agency side, and the advertiser side, but we didn't have a lot of desire for quite some time to really understand what was going on in the black boxes, and every single little tag that was placed on the sites or placed in the advertising units with a lot of leakage and a sort of, I don't really care or want to know, those are some techies that are giving us some extra analytics. And I think that there's a responsibility for everybody that is collecting data, but there's responsibility, I also think, for everybody that's inviting consumers to interact with their content or their advertising to understand what they are enabling in their platform. And I want to add two little things which I think we have to be thinking about going forward. This isn't just a personal computer issue. It's not just about the PC. This is about the phone, this is about the iPad, and this is about the television and the gaming devices. These are all of the connected consumer electronics devices, and we're going to have to learn a lot about what's going on in those apps too.
I mean, I would also like to add to your point is that it's not, you know, we look at it 5 years back or even 3 years back. It's not an issue of whether, you know, advertisers wanted to have that kind of transparency or not. It's that the technology wasn't there to provide that kind of transparency. And as we know, technology evolves and is evolving quicker and quicker. Data storage becomes cheaper and cheaper, and therefore it's allowing us to store more data, even though we don't really know what to do with it. Some of us don't, right? And now that we have DSPs and DMPs, we're definitely trying, you know, peeling back the onion to get to sort of the core of it and understand how we treat that. So I think the evolution of technology has a lot to do with transparency.
So last question, it's the joy and the oi question, which is what's the biggest challenge facing us in the next 12 months? What's the biggest opportunity? You're going to go last. So
that's fine.
What's the biggest challenge, biggest opportunity with what we've been talking about today with privacy, with tracking, and with targeting?
So the biggest opportunity is we've, as an industry, have come a long way. We actually have, I mean, I think about stuff that you were saying to us a year ago, even 6 months ago. And it was a lot of, oi, like, oi vey, this is terrible stuff, we're dead. Industry's come a long way. The biggest opportunity is to finish the job, even though we'll never fully be done, but it's to finish what we've started. And so that's the opportunity, because I guess it's both challenge and opportunity. Maybe I'm not answering it perfectly. The challenge is we've got to get there. We're almost there. And this is independent of people who work with Evidon. This is about giving consistently consumers the control that they deserve and the transparency that they deserve. And the opportunity with that is you're then talking about unleashing, I believe, significant dollars from the brands. Because I can tell you from our experience, and I'd be interested to hear what Grace has to say, brands are freaked out. The words from the commission in particular have freaked them out. They're starting to hear more encouraging words, but they need to know that all their partners in that ad that a major brand is placing the whole way through the chain has the disclosure and the control that consumers want, and that they're doing it on their own website. Getting there is going to, I think, unleash significant dollars, because everyone knows that using data makes ads significantly more effective. That's my take.
Grace?
The opportunity is the unleashing of the dollars. Advertisers have seen a lot of momentum. They've seen results, and they want to put more money into this. But as Scott said, that's also the challenge. But personally, I think one of the biggest challenge is some publishers have taken to the tact of putting an icon on everything. And to me, that is a huge challenge, because that dilutes what we're trying to do, which is consumer education. And if we put an icon on every banner, it seems to imply that we're 100% doing online behavioral advertising, which isn't true. So, you know, the icon is a means to an end. It is not an educational platform. If we're trying to educate consumers, then let's do that separately. But we shouldn't just be saying, let's slap this icon on everything.
Okay.
I think that the challenge is that, and I'm particularly concerned with the movement beyond the personal computer device, that we are going to see practices around other devices where there's even more sensitivity in the consumer, you know, the television set or the gaming device in the child's room. And I think that it has the opportunity to really strike some hot buttons with Congress. And I think that we almost saw around spyware, where we saw it like chairman's amendments to bills that happen in rooms that we aren't, in the back rooms, that we could see things move very fast and had all the bipartisan support, So I think we could see bad actions happen, which could really hurt us. The opportunity, I think, is that we still haven't really won the big battle, which is we haven't really utilized the data yet to make a significantly better consumer experience. And I think that we need to have in front of us all of the time the notion of creating advertising people want. I think the reason that the do not call list was so effective was probably because to virtually every single consumer in America, they saw the inbound direct marketing calls as not valuable at all, not helping their life one little bit, and actually hurting them quite a bit. And I think that that's, to me, the thing that's still in front of us is we have all of this data. Maybe we're able to generate more revenue, but we haven't made people like open up their browsers and say, wow, these are great ads.
Mr. Chairman, last words.
So I would say the joy part of this is, as I listen to Scott and Grace and Dave, you can see that people are enlightened. They're moving in the right direction. Industry has, I think, is making really promising strides in the right direction towards self-regulation, which, going back to Dave's point, is one of the best ways to avoid having things happen to you in smoke-filled. I don't know that they're smoke-filled anymore, but in backroom deals by members of Congress. So I think that's the joy part. The oi part, from our perspective, is that there is no shortage. It's not the people in the room, but there is no shortage of folks who use the internet for really bad practices like phishing scams and foreclosure rescue scams and various other ways to just rip off consumers, and that's a large part of what we do. And we would be ever so happy if the online advertising industry can close this deal where it's really giving consumers a choice option and leave our attorneys and investigators to spend time with the really bad people who are trying to steal money from consumers. So,
well, that's a great way to end. Let's give the panel a big round of applause, everybody. Thank you. Thank you all so very much. So that brings AdTech Inspire to a close. We have the big show opening tomorrow morning with David Fisher. I hope that you'll all join us there, and thank you so very much for coming.